Hello, welcome to another conversation related to our DNP introductory course and transitions to practice. I wanted to let all of you know that I have a few slides here that I thought I might share as you work on your philosophy of nursing paper from the DNP perspective. So here you can see that we have a slide entitled DNP Leadership and Practice and Ways of Knowing. And what we're going to talk a little bit about is knowledge, philosophy, and healthcare provision. So if we move on to the next slide here, what you'll see is that we're going to think about how do we know what we know. So what you can see here is I've got my thinking cap on, which all of you also have your thinking cap on. We're working really hard to understand what the DNP degree is, what the expectations for the degree are, and a little bit about scholarly foundations for practice, scholarship, evidence-based practice, knowledge translation, implementation science, or taking evidence that you've translated for practice and applying it in a particular setting. So here I have a slide that if you look at this picture, I want you to think for a moment, what do you see in this picture? And as we look at this, can we distort or fabricate truth? So the initial view of this is that potentially this might be laying flat, but as we look at it a little bit more carefully, we can see that it's the edifice of a building and that there is some kind of statue work in front of that building. And is the statue work attached to the facade of the building, or is it freestanding and we just see the building behind? The other thing is we see some lightning in the sky, and we might want to find out a little bit about what that is related to what we're seeing. When we look at things in this picture or another one I'm going to show you in a moment, how is it that we might actually distort or fabricate truth related to the science of nursing, related to healthcare delivery, and some other things that we'll talk about momentarily? Moving on to the next slide, we have some terms or words that we use in nursing. These are words that are associated with knowledge or nursing care. So how do we describe these? So what is philosophy? Think about that for a minute. We're going to come back to that. What is a patient? What is caring consciousness? What is healing? How would you describe wellness and illness? Or holistic? This is spelled two different ways depending on your preference. What is holistic care, and what does that entail? And what does it mean to be culturally congruent? So some wise words from one of our favorite characters in a cartoon. Anger is a condition in which the tongue works faster than the mind. So is that a way to describe anger? Or do you describe anger differently? You can't change the past, but you can ruin the present by worrying over the future. And so perhaps during this program, those might be some wise words for us to remember to hold our tongue and to think about what we might be able to change tomorrow that we can't change today. And if you're human like all of me, anger sometimes gets in the way. I was a little frustrated this weekend, and because I'm human, guess what happened? My words were not as nice as they should have been. So here we're going to talk a little bit about ways of knowing for nurses. We're going to discover how nurses know and care. We're going to talk a little bit about what theory is and how that might be different than ways of knowing. And we're going to understand that theory is like a puzzle, which you can see here in this little image of the head, that theory is developed from observations and individual theorists' perceptions of what they think is real. So what Deborah might think is real might be different than what Angela or Kathy or anybody else in our class, Gabriella, might think about truth and knowing. So let's look at another image here. What do you see and what kinds of feelings are elicited when you look at this? What you might see is the American flag. And what does that do for you? Does that elicit some kind of an emotion? Does this picture with the American flag and firefighters bring back a memory of 9/11? What I am assuming that all of you are old enough to remember what happened then and where you were. I, for one, was taking care of patients in the clinic, but my husband was on an airplane flying from Augusta, Georgia to, guess where? New York City. So, and then he was transferring from there to another city in the Northeast. Anyway, what can we assume about this? What do we know? What do we remember? And does that influence the picture or the truth that we see here? So if I were to say maybe what I might assume, here, my observation and my assumption is that these individuals, these firefighters, are doing good, that they are helping individuals who are in need, just like nurses do, and that they are being courageous. They are taking care of people as best they know how, based on their preparation and their knowledge. But the other thing that I know from this picture, because of my life experiences and the things that I have seen over the years, is that the American flag here represents the United States. And the United States, for the most part, is considered a great country. We have our problems, as any country does, but we have a lot of freedoms and a lot of opportunities that people in other countries don't have. Now, how do I know that? That is my personal experience and ways of knowing associated with my lived experiences, the things that I've been taught, and hearing stories, of course, the media, and other types of information influence what I think. So let's look at another image. So seeing is believing, correct? Right? Well, is it? Is reality truth? Is reality knowledge? So here we see an eye. Our eyes obviously is how we see, but the image here inside this sort of relates back to the image that I showed previously, and it's the American flag. I don't know exactly what's down here. Maybe you can figure that out. But is this someone's eye that has a reflection in the photo, or is this a doctored image where we have changed reality and made it what we want it to be? So moving on just a little bit farther, here are some words that we might use to describe phenomena. And these kinds of words that describe phenomena are environment, context, patient, relationships, health, wellness, medications, interventions, evidence-based practice. So these really aren't all the words here, but I am showing you this to help you understand that in order to validate nursing, we need to understand the language that we discuss or that we use within our profession. So here is an image. Is this beautiful or is it disastrous? Well, the image itself could be considered beautiful. What we see in here are some animals in the wilderness, and one of the places I love to be is out of doors in the mountains of Utah. And I obviously wouldn't want to be there in the middle of a fire, but is this really beautiful or is it disastrous? You have to know, based on your experiences, what you think it is, and that reality of knowledge may be very different than my reality of knowledge. So moving on here, is knowledge really truth? Well, think about how you would describe your first experience with death and dying to someone who has not heard that experience. So going back to words, what kinds of words would you use to describe that? And how would you convey the emotions that you felt? The frustration, the satisfaction of potentially helping a family and a patient through a difficult time. How do you describe that to someone else? And the words that you use are your personal knowledge, but is that knowledge the same as the truth? For Deborah, who also has experienced death and dying a number of different times over my career, and would I describe it differently? So here we have this cute little cartoon. Surely you agree that truth can be created by the repetition of a lie. And I'm here to tell you that I do believe that sometimes the things that we believe are potentially the result of a repetition of something that's false. For example, one thing that we all know about is how many years did people believe that the earth was flat? Well, until we had new evidence, until we had new knowledge, that was the belief, and that was the accepted societal belief about the shape of the earth. Well, in nursing, there's a lot of things that we do that are related to tradition potentially, or things that we've always done. And we might believe that that is truth, when in reality it might potentially become a lie as we have more and more knowledge and more evidence out there for us to use related to what we do and what we know in nursing. So here again are things really what they seem to be. So Plato, Aristotle, and the Greek skeptics have some sayings that are similar to this in all of their cultures. Things are not what they appear to be. A trained mind is required to determine reality. And so that's from Plato specifically. So what do you see here? Are all of these puppies the same? And why are they hanging on a clothesline? And why are they in onesies? So of course somebody here is being creative potentially and is talking about or demonstrating something new. But if you look at each one of these individual puppies, they are different, just like our patients are different. And so we need to remember that as we effect patient-centered care and systems that address a group of patients in order to take care of them individually, but also collectively to improve outcomes, that we must remember that each organization is different. So what we might potentially do from a systems change perspective in one institution might be different than in another. And of course, we all know the same is true for our patients. So here, how do we know what we do? No. How can we show what we know? And does validate what we do? So we have nurses' ways of knowing, and that's the Carper article that you read, the Behringer article about Carper's ways of knowing. So we have personal knowledge, we have empirical knowledge, aesthetic knowing, socio-political knowing, and ethical knowing. And in our profession, we tend to look at empirical knowledge and ethical knowledge as very important for us. But we also have what we call aesthetic knowing. And so a lot of times we in nurses and nursing get this gut level feeling, or we see a change in our patient, but maybe we don't have a sign or symptom to necessarily manifest what's happening, but within a few minutes or maybe 30 minutes to an hour, we can sense that patient might be beginning to crash. Within the 30 to 60 minutes, we see those types of evidence being manifested, but for some reason or another, we know what we know based on our experiences. So here, nursing theory, just so y'all know, is a way to improve nursing. Theorists are inquisitive, and they use personal observations to determine what they think outcomes should be. And of course, we know Florence Nightingale was one of our first nurse scientists. So let's move on. Why study theory? And here we have Benner's stages of competency. And I think anytime we look at new nursing knowledge, no matter what it is, whether it's theory or philosophy or some new technical skill that our nurse practitioner DNP students might learn, or some new skill that our informaticist DNP students might learn, or our leaders when they learn different principles related to leadership. Those are all things that over time we move from our novice perspective to our expert, and of course we go through these stages, and this is actually a theory or a model. So what we know again are the four ways of knowing from Carper, and we now add this unknowing or socio-political. And in the context of care for nursing, we do need to understand what our patients are outside the clinic. So what kinds of financial or personal or socioeconomic challenges do they have? What I'd like you to remember now is that ridges and peaks provide the big picture. And I don't want you to get stuck in the valley as you start to talk about what your personal philosophy might be. Remember,